Hi, everyone. Welcome to Carolyn Talks, the podcast where I talk to film creatives about their art and what makes them love this industry so much, even though it can have its ups and downs. And today I am joined by Geoff Macnaughton, who is the Senior Director and Industry and Theatrical Lead Programmer for the Primetime category for at the Toronto International Film Festival. We're going to be talking about the 2021 Film Festival, but before we do that, I'll ask Geoff to speak a bit about himself and how he became the festival programmer for TIFF. So, Geoff?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's exciting to get a little bit of a breath post festival, and as you mentioned yourself, I'm the senior director of industry and theatrical, and the programmer of Primetime at TIFF. I have been with the organization for 13 years. So this is the 13th festival that I've done, and each one feels like a bit of a badge of honor. And I think, industry and theatrical, what that means in our world is that, the business areas in which I cover for the organization are our talent development programs, like Filmmakers Lab, Rising Stars, and Writers Studio, as well as our industry conference and talks that are very much catered to emerging creators and industry professionals, not only during the festival, but throughout the year, as well as kind of our marketplace infrastructure that we have, obviously TIFF being a huge destination for film sales and business to happen. And then on the other side of things, on the theatrical, non-theatrical side of things, very much around our TIFF Bell Lightbox and our programming year round. So, many people who are familiar with TIFF as a festival may not realize that we are a home of cinema, every day of the year. And we bring the best in new releases and Cinematheque titles. So for myself, my team also does our new release programming, working closely with distributors and producers on that, as well as our non-theatrical programming. And what we consider non-theatrical would be a lot of our digital releasing throughout the year for PVOD or VOD, as well as our really exciting film circuit program, in which we bring films to over 150 communities across Canada throughout the year, and even during the festival this year, to ensure that these communities are able to see the films that TIFF is putting its kind of curatorial stamp of approval on. And unfortunately, some of these titles, based on, some of the megaplexes in some of these locations, they're not able to see these kind of author-driven content or, films from, emerging filmmakers. So that kind of covers the different businesses that I work on in the organization. And one of my passions, as you mentioned off the top, is the Primetime program, in which I curate a selection of series during the festival to premiere.
Right. And that's so much.
Yeah.
So kudos to you and your team for getting all of that done throughout the year and then still getting the festival programming set up. And I think for this year, running pretty smoothly. So, applause to all of you.
Thank you.
So we'll talk a bit about the prime time for this year's festival. Can you go through the process of selecting the prime time? Because what sets prime time apart from the other categories is it's usually set around series or limited series. So like this year we had Colin in Black and White by Ava DuVernay and team, Hellbound, which is a South Korean supernatural thriller. Yes, that's like my passion right there. Directed by Yeon Sang-ho. If you are not familiar with that name, he is the director of Train to Busan, my all-time favorite movie, as well as the sequel, Peninsula. And then you have Start Off, which is directed by Fab Filipino and Renuka Jayapalan. And then The Panthers, which is a series about the emergence of the Black Panther movement in the AAPI community. So can you just talk about a bit about going through the process of all of the other submissions I guess you would have had, and then whittling it down to these four selections that you showed for the festival?
Yeah, I think with television, establishing television as a series within within a film festival, it takes some time. So I think this is around like the 7th year of Primetime. I've been at the helm of it for 3 years. And I think in those early days, you know, television at a film festival was rare. So to get access to this specific content was a little more challenging. I think my predecessor did a great job in terms of establishing the program. And then what I've been able to do over the last 3 years is really cultivate new relationships with broadcasters, distributors, you know, creators, kind of showrunners, etc., to really do a lot of outreach prior to the festival. So I would say, you know, a lot of times when I'm tracking series, for instance, like Colin Black and White, that's something that I've had on my radar for, you know, a while now. And there's series that are being announced now that I'm already kind of putting in, you know, the back of my mind and tracking for next year. So it's just, and with series, and in some other ways with film, but even more so with series, you know, with these very much, you know, scheduled broadcast dates for a lot of this content, timing is everything. So, you know, so when you're really pulling together these series in many ways, you're hoping for, you know, the best content that is looking for a opportunity from a promotional standpoint to get a lot of press attention or potentially get sales, like a title like the Panthers. But in the end, I think one thing that's important in that selection process is ensuring that, because, you know, I have 4 slots for the entirety of television, it's ensuring that, you know, the content that I'm screening is something that excites me that I've just never seen before. And I think that can be said about all 4 of the series that you mentioned. You know, Colin Black and White for me was something, you know, obviously it's a perfect marriage between, you know, an established filmmaker like Ava DuVernay working in series and working with a subject like Colin Kaepernick. You know, that alone, that pitch is, you know, how do you not say yes to that pitch? But actually, when I saw the series for the first time, it was actually the form that was the most exciting part of it. Because what Ava did in terms of how she told the story, jumping between, you know, Colin almost in this kind of like experimental theater piece, and then jumping back to his childhood, and also jumping to kind of these like almost documentary vignettes to show his influences. All of that was what really hooked me, in addition to the pitch. And then you mentioned a series like Hellbound. We've never had a Korean drama in primetime before. That was obviously a huge draw. You know, to your point in terms of, you know, Train to Busan being one of your favorite films, you know, it's up there for me as well in terms of just having a, you know, a master of genre in film genre in a program like Primetime was fantastic. And I think with Hellbound, if audiences aren't hooked within the first, I would say 10 minutes of the first episode, I would be shocked, because it's just such a wild ride. And then a series like Sort of, which is a Canadian series, I think, you know, it's important for us as a whole, as a festival, to ensure that there's strong Canadian representation across all of our programs as a festival that is, whose home is in Toronto. And for me, this is a series that really spotlights Toronto in a really interesting way in terms of Toronto's, you know, diversity. And for me, you know, that series is, you know, pushing things in a hugely important way forward, as it's really the first series that is led by, you know, a trans creator, and as also your lead star that we've had in Canada. Obviously, that is, far overdue, but the importance of ensuring that that series is seen and that audiences know that, it's also, one of the, it would be the funniest series I've ever programmed. And I think that's also important in terms of like finding a space for laughter at a film festival, because I think a lot of people look at film festivals as something that is like, the content can be a little on the darker side, or the artsier side, and sort of is just like seeing that with an audience, a live audience, was magical because everyone was just dying laughing. And then with the Panthers, as you mentioned, for me, like that story is a story that I myself was just not aware of, and to see that on screen, the formation of the Polynesian Panther Party, that alone was so exciting. And I'm sure there's many others like me, unfortunately, that don't know of that part of New Zealand's history. And I thought it was very important for audiences, not only in Toronto, but around the world, to see it.
I think one of the first I kind of knew, like, with especially talking about the Panthers in particular, is that when it came to like Asian members of the Black Panther Party, like I kind of had an idea that they existed because I've seen like archival footage of, like Chinese immigrants taking part in protests in the state. There's like a whole section of the Black Panther Party in like Japan, right? And then I saw again, it was mentioned through when I was doing research for the Small Axe series. One of the films, the Mangrove Nine, like one of the leaders, Althea Jones, like she had like connections with with like Indian members of like the Black Panther Party in England. So so I think like documentaries like this in particular is very important when you talk about the history of like the Black Power movement and the Black Panthers, that you had members of other like people of color communities involved in the Black Panthers. And like especially for New Zealand, like if you know the history of like New Zealand and Australia, to know that they had their own Black Panther movement there, I think it's very important to know, because like they like a lot of the members, they are Aborigine, but then they're also considered Black. So it's important that like that context too. I haven't seen it, but that's one of the reasons I'm really interested in it, because like usually when we talk about Black Power movement, like unfortunately a lot of it is centered around just North America and particularly America. So it's important that we get a broader context. And then talking about sort of like living in Toronto, like Toronto is an extremely diverse city, like racially, and then culturally and ethnically. And then you have like people of the LGBTQ plus community, and to have a series led by a trans creator, I think is important. And to have that creator be the star of their own show, that's also, I think, a big thing, because as you said, it was long overdue, and like, I'm hoping that we get to see more of these. Usually we see these as like maybe like one-off, like creative endeavors, like for during festivals we see them, but we don't really get to see them get a push towards like national TV. So hopefully this gets picked up by a network, because let's be real, when it comes to Canadian TV, it is woefully underrepresented with regards to people of color and those from other marginalized communities. So I'm hoping sort of probably gets picked up by
Well, one of the success stories of sort of is that HBO Max is now on board from a North American perspective. So it's definitely going to see life just like outside of Canada. And I know that some international broadcasters are also looking closely at it. So, and I think that speaks to what a festival is able to do, coming full circle, the idea of, showcasing films and series in this case that, they may have no distribution plans or no distributor associated to it, or they may have distributors in certain areas. Maybe it's just North America. And they're looking to get outside of that. And, festivals like TIFF create a space where, with press attention and with, the industry coming together in such a big way, these series are able, and these films are able to get, international distribution that they may not have thought was possible in countries that, at first glance may not seem like they would have had interest in say, a particular film or a series. However, because, a festival has given it, that curatorial stamp of approval, like this is must see, this will do well with audiences, all of those things that a festival brings to the table. That's always a nice success story for us as a festival, at least, to see these films go on to be seen by more people than just a festival audience.
Yeah, and I think like when you mentioned HBO Max, which I think is great because it's a streaming platform. And
Mm.
how has the I guess you could say the gaining popularity of streaming platforms, like you have HBO Max, you have Amazon Prime, you have Netflix, which is a juggernaut right now, and then Disney Plus, and like how has the advent of streaming platforms, especially I would say in the last probably 3 years, because they've been around for a while, but like I would say they've really blown up in the last 3 years. How has that actually aided you in like helping platform these shows? Because Hellbound is, as we mentioned, is South Korean, and unlike and it's which means when it comes to South Korean content, like they've only I think streaming platforms have helped like as particularly North American audiences and particularly American audiences find like not only South Korean, because when people talk about Asian, they're always talking about South Korean content, but I mean there's like Japanese, Taiwanese, Thai, South
Mm.
Asian, Vietnamese, and like you have all of these films and these shows being brought to the a more international masses and North American masses. How has that helped you as not only as the director for the program, but just also as a fan to be able to say, I can now finally show these things that I'm excited about? Because you mentioned Hellbound. When I saw that Hellbound was added to the list, I legit screamed because it was like I'm like, oh my god, I'm getting a South Korean drama because I
Mm.
love them so much. But I have seen I knew about the show before I saw the announcement for TIFF, because like I cover like Korean dramas for my podcast and stuff, and I follow like the director, as I mentioned, Yeon Sano. Like I'm always looking for whatever he brings out. So then when I saw that, I'm like, this is amazing for me personally. But then I think it's just amazing to have a Korean drama be part of a film festival, because I believe this is the first time, to my knowledge, that a South Korean drama has been platformed at a North American festival. Like it would be commonplace like in South Korea and possibly like in China and Japan for their festivals, but I think this is the first time for a North American festival. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'm not. I know for us, it's definitely the first, and I would have to look into other North American festivals. It might be the case, and I think in regards to your question around streamers, I think that a company like Netflix is looking for world rights for a lot of their content, and what that means in a lot of cases is that their content is international in nature because they are servicing audiences across the globe. And what that means to a programmer is programmers are always looking for inroads to content. We're looking for ways to access content. We're looking for ways to see content, to consider it for programming. And when you have a company like Netflix or Amazon, who has such a breadth of content and working so internationally and taking their international presence so seriously, especially in relation to television, it does make things a little easier. It's I would say maybe 8 years ago, to access a film like Hellbound as a North American festival, there might be going through the filmmaker, going through the producer, going through all these channels to access this title, navigating the complexities of its distribution strategy and things like that, and broadcast strategy, whether it's in the country of its origin or whether it's in North America. And if something doesn't have North American rights, it becomes a little harder. And I think for us, we have always taken our relationships with companies like Netflix, Amazon, HBO, all of these companies very seriously because of, not only the content that they are producing and distributing, but, knowing that they really, like us, respect the importance of ensuring that the content that they have is international and for a large kind of breadth of audience.
And I hope it's something that we get to see more often. I was a bit bummed we only got 3 episodes in the full cycle because I was sitting down there with him like, so we're gonna get episode 4? No, okay.
It's a tease. That's the prime time of all the programs. Prime time is the biggest tease because I think there's only been one time where we've showed an entire series, which was last year with Mira Nair's series that closed out our festival. We showed every episode. But that's rare. And I think, a lot of times audiences, they get hooked in those first couple of episodes and are now used to binging culture, especially with series. So it's a bit unusual to only get a taste and have to wait for the rest.
It is true. I'm a binge watcher.
So am I. I'm guilty of that as well.
I know, like yesterday I watched all 9 episodes of Squid Game on Netflix, and my friend was like, "Oh, he watches." I'm like, 9 episodes is nothing for me. I can do like a full 16 episode series in one day. Um, yeah, but I was sitting out there and it was like, wow, that was such a cliffhanger. But when it comes to like series, so like talking about cliffhangers, like how do you decide which episodes of the series to end on? Like I did, unfortunately, Hellbound was the only one I was able to see because scheduling with the other films. Like is that determined by you or is it determined by the companies and by the distributors?
It's a bit of a conversation, to be honest, between the distributor and myself. There's a couple of things you're juggling there. You don't want to be in a situation where you have, an audience, you have an 8-hour slot in which you're asking audiences to sit in a theater for 8 hours. I know some people, would love that, but I also think, it's putting a lot on an audience. So I think, keeping the window of time to, roughly around, a 2 max 3 hour window, including a Q&A is usually what we aim for. However, we're also aiming, working closely with the distributor in relation to a natural cutoff point. And you don't want, I like the idea of leaving things on a cliffhanger a lot. I think, television was built on that in many ways. But I also want to leave enough space in the series for characters to develop and their arcs to be established. Because if you cut it off too soon, you just don't have enough as a viewer to feel like you're ready to invest in more. I even just in kind of when recommending series to friends, I usually recommend, get through the first 3, watch the first 3 episodes, give the series at least that. And I think with each of the series that I programmed this year, in a way, there's different episodes that act as hooks to an audience to, pull them in to watch the whole series. Hellbound for me was the first 10 minutes, I'm in for the rest. The Panthers to me, as much as everything is established in the first episode, it was really important that we ended on the 3rd episode in terms of like where the narrative arc goes and kind of not concludes, but breaks at that 3rd episode. So each series is a little different, but usually, it's between that 2 to 3 hour window we're trying to aim for.
And how has because this is something that we have been in for going on 2 years now, how has the pandemic affected your ability to program the shows that you wanted? Like, were there any that you wanted but couldn't acquire because like maybe like the pandemic halted production, or the distributors were like, we're gonna hold it back until like the next year to see how things go? Like, how did that play a part? Because I think the primetime category is slightly different. I think would operate slightly different than the regular film categories, because like there are some films that were filmed like 2 years ago and then they're like, we're releasing them for the festival circuit now, or there were some that were filmed during the pandemic and they're releasing them now, and like they're like just before they screen at the festivals is legit sometimes like the day before is when they're finished editing. Like, how does that differ for the primetime department?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think it goes a bit of both ways. I think it's complicated in that, like, I have examples of series that that I've been tracking for a while that have, have been delayed based on whether it's, in relation to, production and health and safety or other factors. But I've also had series that I have essentially, wanted and offered slots to. But one thing led to another, and the distributor decided that it fit more of a late summer window from a release standpoint. So, and they moved it up in the calendar. And when something like that happens, that's tough as a programmer because, you fall in love with the show. And I think with Primetime, one of the big things is like introducing audiences to these series, the idea of, putting TIFF's, curatorial stamp on something after it's already been seen by a North American audience, it's a little less exciting. So, no, there's been examples where things have been moved up to fill in a different, slot in one's calendar, and I've lost the series due to that. So, yeah, and I just think, production schedules in a big way. The juggling involved from any curator, film curator or TV curator is tricky, but I think the importance of it all is keeping just a really strong line of communication with the partners that you work with to access this content, to know what's in play and what might not be.
It's interesting because like something's been for the last year and a half. I don't think like for us in the industry, whether for yourself as a curator, for myself as a film critic and journalist, like sometimes I always wonder like, when I'm doing interviews, like, do I always have to mention the pandemic? But then, like, we can't really get away from it because it has affected so much of our lives, and it has affected how our industry operates now. Like a lot of things that we did before we can't do now, or like we view completely different. Like film festivals, like the only thing that I saw in cinema was Hellbound. Everything else that I saw at home on either my laptop or I Chromecasted it to the TV, which I'm so happy to whoever is responsible for that. Thank you for making all the film possible. Like that was a blessing.
Oh, that's good. Were you at the Cinesphere screening of Hellbound?
No, I was at the one in the
The press and industry one. Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, because like
how was it seeing it on the big screen? I guess that's another question of like, when selecting series as well, I think understanding that they are eventually going to be seen on a much larger screen than people are used to seeing television, and what series work in that format. I've seen series on the big screen that are very dark visually. I remember seeing an episode of Game of Thrones on the big screen, and I could barely see what was going on because it was a night battle, and it was an amazing experience. But, when directors are creating television, they're creating television to be backlit in the way that television was, born to be in many ways. And I think about that a lot when I'm programming series. Like if something is too dark or it feels like it's not going to work on that large of a screen, it may impact a decision. And with Hellbound, the first scene of Hellbound, and really the series as a whole, it feels like something that really works on the big screen because, when you watch it, you're kind of like, from a special effects and action driven side of things, it feels like you're watching an extension of Train to Busan in many ways, in terms of that scope.
Yeah, no, because I do watch a lot of them. I sometimes I can tell what will work on the big screen, and like because I think especially for a lot of the dramas now, a lot of them are made for high definition TV. For one of them, a lot of them are made for larger format TVs because like they're not like made for like like I would say they also work on laptops because I use my laptop a lot too. But you can tell when a director takes into consideration like screen size and like format and that stuff. And this one I can tell it works. And I'll say like there was a definite because Train to Busan came out in 2016 and Peninsula came out I think it was early last year, early 2020. And there was a difference in quality that made me question like exactly what they did do with his budget, because that film is darker literally in lighting, like the lighting is different than in Train to Busan. But I think he may have whatever criticisms he may have heard about Peninsula, he definitely applied to Hellbound, because like it's dark visually, but you can still see the action, and it worked amazingly well on the large screen, and I think it will work really well either on a laptop or like a 30-inch TV. And I think it's good to hear that as a programmer that you actually take that into consideration, because that's something I was actually wondering. Like when like it's for TV, like so but you're showing it for the festival on screen, like how do you consider that? So I'm glad that you actually brought that up, because that this is where I also want to get into a bit the fan side of things for yourself as a fan of these of the shows that you show. Like what is the experience like? So like you do everything like from the professional start. You're like, I'm a programmer, this is what I'm doing, I'm thinking about this from the festival. But as a fan, like when you're watching these things, like what is like how much does that play into your decision? Because you said you want to make things like possibly you select the episodes because you want to leave enough for the audience to want more. And that's definitely from, I think, from a fan perspective, because you're thinking how as a fan would think the cliffhanger of this would hook the audience. And but then for you, like just watching them during the festival and getting to see people's reaction, like how is that for you?
Yeah, I think it's important to, as a programmer, to like understand what you lean towards just naturally as a fan, and take a close look at those things. For instance, like I think, personally, I think I'm very drawn to very, at times very, dark kind of detective series. And not your, your an HBO detective series, or like a Scandinavian detective series. I can see myself being very drawn to those things. I think the nature of those series is, there's cliffhangers involved. You're really pulled into the mystery behind it. And I think as a programmer, you kind of have to step back and say, I don't want to be the programmer that just, plays his hits, plays the things that he likes. I think it's important to, look outside of that and ensure that your program has just a mix and kind of something for everyone, even if it's, outside of your personal taste. Like I remember, watching, countless series for Primetime, and to like, as a break in my mind, I would watch, a reality show like Bake Off, the British Bake Off. And it was just this like, and I love that series. And it was just this perfect like separation between what I was watching and what I needed to ingest from a pure joy perspective of like, turn my brain off and watch people cooking delicious cakes and tarts and things like that. But yeah, I think you kind of have to take the fan. You have to recognize what you're drawn to as a fan, and you have to take that the fan nature out of the selection process. And what I think it also does is it makes me become a fan of genres or storytellers that I didn't even know as much about, in terms of their previous work. And there's, a lot of examples of that. I remember watching, Mrs. Fletcher, the HBO series, and programming that a couple of years ago, and then really getting into, the creator, who is also an author, his work. And so, that's not something that I might be drawn to in my spare time of watching, but I could see how great it was. And it introduced me to a novelist that I wanted to learn more about.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I love those Scandinavian dramas. The Scandinavian ones, the Swedish, like Denmark, they make some amazing thrillers. Like they go dark.
Oh my goodness, they go so dark. I know. I can't help myself. And also like documentary series. I think I do watch a lot of documentary series, and those true crime series, just like true crime podcasts, like there's something about them that's so addictive. It's like candy. And so I in those moments, I kind of have to like separate myself from that moment and be like, okay, let's take another look outside of being like a fan of these to see if they work.
Hmm. Right. That's great. So now we're talking about being a fan. So we're talking about a film festival. What
Mm.
I want to talk a bit about your about the films that you have seen. I like. Is there one in particular that you really loved and really enjoyed for this festival?
Yeah, I have a couple. I might cheat. I may say three if that's okay. But the one that like change, like the one that I feel like I will never, see again in terms of like its originality and something that the moment I saw it, I felt very almost changed as a person was the Palme d'Or winner Titan. We're actually bringing it to TIFF Bell Lightbox as one of our big new releases. It opened. It was one of our Midnight Madness films that Peter Kaplowski programmed, and it is from the director of Raw, who is Julie Ducournau, and it is just you know it is just so wild, and you can't telling someone about it would actually be a disservice because to go in blind in a film like that you know is quite an experience. The other film that in my mind was kind of this return to the cinematic form and like the must-see IMAX experience is Denis Villeneuve's Dune. For me, I think a lot of people talked last year about like, Tenet is what will bring people back to the cinema. And then, no matter what people think of Tenet, it did get mixed reviews, and it didn't feel like people were ready yet. It was, screened in drive-ins and things like that. However, for me with Dune feels to me like the true champion of the cinematic experience and what will really help bring people back to the cinema in a big way. And I think it's a really important film in that regard and something that like deserves to be seen on IMAX, which we showcased at the festival. And then the other film I will mention is Night Raiders, which is by Denis Goulet, who has a close relationship to TIFF as an organization. It is, I think, one of the best Canadian films that I've seen in a very long time. And it looks at, colonization, and it's this fantastic kind of sci-fi thriller from not only a Canadian filmmaker but an Indigenous filmmaker who is going to have a spectacular future in the industry as a whole. And I think those three films to me stand out as three of my favorites. But we had over 100 films at the festival, and in addition to those 4 series. And I think one of the great things about a film festival, and especially TIFF, is just there's just something for everyone. And I'm sure if you asked another programmer, they could name a completely different 3, and each programmer would have a completely different answer. So, and the same with audience members who have different tastes, as you mentioned before, and are drawn to different subjects and stories.
For sure. I haven't unfortunately haven't seen those 3 films, but I've heard about all of them. As Titan, is it Titan or Titan?
I say Titan. I think that's right, but I could be wrong. But I think it's Titan.
Yeah, I've been hearing about it since Khan, and everyone is just like, it's one of those indescribable films where you're just like, hard to explain. I've seen the trailer, and when you watch
Yeah.
the trailer, what is going on here? Is that you're like, I have no idea where this is gonna go. And everyone that I've spoke to that's seen it, they say the same thing. They're like, you can't really describe describe this film. This is one of them that you definitely have to see. And for Dune, like I knew Denis Villeneuve, he makes amazingly cinematic films. Like his films are like stunning. Like his cinematography is always like absolutely stunning. And for Night Raiders, I that one that has one that's been on my radar for a while since I got the first press release for it. I believe it would have been, I wouldn't even say last year. I think like the end of like 2019. Like I was speaking to a publicist that she was dealing with, and like she knows I like to speak and represent films that are about people of color and by people of color. So that's one I had been hearing about for a while. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to see it, but there are three that are on my my watch list when they eventually get released. Um, but the thing is that I do love about TIFF in particular, like I find like it's like you always get not only are you think a wide diversity of films from all over the place, all over the world, but you get like Canadian talent in particular. Like for the prime time, we have sort of what you said is a Canadian production, and then Night Raiders, which is about the indigenous people of Canada and about colonization. So like when you have like a festival like TIFF that makes sure to platform films by indigenous people, and I think that's also very important because like coming from someone who only just I would say relatively is new to the industry. I've only been doing this 5 years now. Like before I would have only known about like smaller films, but like they weren't things that were got like a lot of press, but I found it since I joined this industry, like I find like a lot of indigenous films and projects are getting way more press now, and they're getting more attention, and like you're getting more productions, which is something that we really need, I think, especially on Canadian TV, because as I said before, a lot of like Canadian TV is very white. But when you have these films and you have these creators like Dennis, like it's great that we're getting them now, because like it's never too late, in my opinion, to finally um get representation, because at least now the generations coming up can see her work and see the work that is being done by other creatives.
Mm-hmm. No, completely. And I think this was an exceptional year for Canadian film and kind of new filmmakers that really, stepped onto the TIFF stage in a big way and are, filmmakers who have come through our talent development programs. And, that's the other side of what I do and my team does is, I think, that's where it starts in terms of, if you are developing, diverse and new voices in your development programs, they are going on to be part of not only TIFF as a festival in terms of bringing their films to TIFF, but they're also bringing their films. Night Raiders premiered in Berlin. Dennis is an alumni of our talent development programs. Night Raiders then came home to TIFF. It'll play other Canadian festivals. It will have that life. And I think that's just so important. And that speaks to the importance of film festivals, development programs that festivals or organizations have, because it's creating space for filmmakers who may not feel like they have a space within that industry. It's creating a space for them, and it's allowing audiences to better understand and have access to those voices and stories in a very healthy way. And I think other films, Canadian films to put on people's radar, like Learn to Swim is definitely something from Tyrone Tommy that audiences should check out. And the other one that comes to mind is Scarborough, also a film that came out of our talent development programs from Shesha Nakai and Rich Williamson. So there's just like, I'm very excited with the current state of, filmmakers in Canada and the types of projects that they are developing. Obviously, there's a lot more work to be done, but I think what we saw out of this year's festival was that there is an amazing emergence of new storytellers that I hope we'll be talking about for a long time from now.
And I think this is the perfect place to end our discussion. Is there anything that you would like to say before we wrap up? Because is there anything apart from the films that you on projects that you've mentioned that you'd like to promote, that any upcoming showings that the Primetime section may have for upcoming TIFF screens? Because as we mentioned, like TIFF shows films throughout the year, and a lot of them are available digitally on the digital platform. So is there anything you would like to mention about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just mention we are opening our building again in early October. We are super excited to welcome audiences back to TIFF Bell Lightbox. And and you haven't seen Titan. So this is your chance to come and see it as a new release. It definitely deserves to be seen on the big screen. So you should come out and check it out.
I know that one is gonna be. I'll be like, what is going on here? But in the best way, yeah, I'm gonna be like entertaining. Like, what is happening? Oh my gosh, that one though. Honestly, if you when you everyone is listening or watching, when you watch that trailer, you'll have the same reaction as I do, and it's definitely one of those films that you just have to watch because, I and that's the thing. I think like there's been a lot of really unique films this year too. Like apart from Titan, that like two of the films that I saw was Terrorizers, which is a Taiwanese film by Hobie Ding, and then there was Whether the Weather is Fine by Carlo Francisco Manatad, which is a Filipino film. That one, those two are those ones when you watch the trailer, it does not reveal anything. Like what you watch is has like when you watch these films, you'll be like, that's not what I was expecting, but they're amazing. Like there's some of like I think two of my favorite films for the festival. But as Jeff said, like when the Bell Lightbox opens, like, and you feel safe, please go watch these films. You can watch them on the digital platforms as well. And again, thank you so much, Jeff, for joining me and talking with me about this because I think it's really important, to, especially to talk about the Primetime platform because when people think of film festivals, they think of films. And they don't really think of like TV shows or documentary series, or limited series. So it's important that we let people know that these things are available through film festivals too, because they're just as worthwhile as seeing as the big name films, as we'd say.
Totally agree. Well, thanks, Carolyn. That's great.